The evidence-based selected response item, or the EBSR, is an important item type that all students should be familiar with before taking the PARCC assessment. The evidence-based selected response item is an item that was developed for the PARCC assessment. An EBSR is simply a question that combines two responses. In the first response, a student is asked a traditional question. In the second response, a student is asked to provide or show evidence from the text that supports the answer they provided to in the first question. EBSR items focus on the citing of evidence from text, and this is a question type that will appear both on the PARCC performance-based assessment as well as the PARCC end-of-year assessment. EBSR items also can include questions that contain more than one right answer, and this will allow for a student to generate or demonstrate a richer understanding and insight of the text. Gathering key details about the passage and supporting that understanding is basically what an EBSR question does. Here is an example from a grade 3 EBSR from the end of the year. What you will see is two different parts, a part A and a part B. In part A, there will be a question that will be about a key detail. Part B will be a question that will ask the student to support that understanding using evidence from the text. So typically in part B, students will be reading or choosing from answers that are quotations or lines taken from the text. Let's take a closer look at an EBSR. Here in the sample exam item from grade 3, the question in part A is something that students will be very familiar with. What is one main idea of how animals live? This is a pretty traditional question, and it can be found on many standardized tests. What is different or not traditional is that question in part 2, which asks for the student to supply the sentence from the article that best supports the answer. This type of question is really asking for deeper insight and understanding. A student would need to be able to demonstrate that he or she can use the evidence from the text by selecting an appropriate quotation or even a specific example. This is an example of the common core shifts in ELA, specifically shift 4, which is a need or an emphasis on text-based answers. The EBSR items actually are part of what students will need to know and be able to do if they are going to answer the prose constructed response item, which is the short answer or the essay on the PARCC exam. The EBSR items are questions that help to draw the student into the text to get a deeper or close reading of the information or material. Those questions are designed to allow or to support a student in that close analytical reading, providing them with rich resources and details so that they can compare ideas and also synthesize or bring those ideas together. When the student is asked to complete one of the 3 prose constructed response questions, such as a narrative task, a literary analysis task, or even a research simulation task, that student would be relying on those previous evidence-based selected response questions that helped the student to get deeper into the text. Here, for example, you will see after a student has read several short 2 short stories and answered several evidence-based selected responses, he or she would be writing that prose constructed response, in this case an essay in which they would have to explain how Old Mother West Wind and the sandwiches, words, and actions are important to the plots of the stories, using what they learned about the characters to support their answer. What they learned about the characters can be supplied by the evidence-based selected response questions. So here we see that the PCR is going to be based specifically on text examples. Scoring of the EBSR is also something new and different. Traditionally, every right answer will receive a score or a certain amount of points, but on the EBSR, it's going to be scored a little differently. What you will see is if a student is able to get only one of the 2 parts correct, for example, part A, that student would be receiving 1 point. If a student is able to get both part A and part B correct, which means getting the key idea and as well as supplying the specific evidence, that student would be able to score 2 points. What's important to note is that this is a new item type for students, and they may be very unfamiliar with the format. And so exposing students to the type of questions in which they're asked not only for key details, but also the evidence of those key details will be the best preparation and support for this type of item on the PARCC assessment.